Welcome to the Exponential Minds podcast. The research, development, launch, and growth of new technologies is creating incredible momentum in the modern world. Join futurist Nikolas Badminton as he talks with the innovators and the exponential minds that are tackling some of the biggest problems and creating solutions that are propelling humanity to the next level.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Exponential Minds podcast. My name is Nikolas Badminton. I'm a futurist that travels around the world, helping customers look out 5, 10, 20 years into the future to try and work out how the world's going to change. And today I'm incredibly excited to have an author, a journalist, and an amazing orator of what's happening in the world, Peter Nowak. He's a former staff reporter and editor at the Globe and Mail, National Post, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and New Zealand Herald, and has won journalism awards in two countries. His work has appeared in Sydney Morning Herald, New Scientist, Boston Globe, Toronto Star, and many others. His first book, Sex, Bombs and Burgers, with a Macleans bestseller, and his second book, Humans 3.0, was published in 5 countries. In his third nonfiction book, The Rise of Real-Life Superheroes and the Fall of Everything Else, which we're going to delve into today, Peter looks at the mysterious world of the thousands of real men and women who don masks and costumes to fight crime and help the helpless while the rest of the world falls apart. Peter, thanks very much for being on the podcast today.
My pleasure, Nick. Thanks for having me.
So we met a few years ago at a conference, and and now we sort of find ourselves here, and obviously you're a pretty notable author, and you sort of delve into these the edges of society, the not even the counterculture. It's like the counterculture, the people that are just climbing over the fence into society and trying to sort of shake it up and make an impact. But your new book, so The Rise of Real Life Superheroes and the Fall of Everything Else. Can you just tell us a little bit about that and what was the impetus to go ahead and research and write that?
Yeah, sure. It's this is one of those things that I think you get your best ideas when you're bored or when your mind is, going in weird places. And that was the case one night when I was trying to get to sleep and I couldn't. And me being, kind of a huge nerd, I was lying there thinking, most people I think would probably try to count sheep or something like that. I was lying there thinking silly things like, how come there's nobody who's tried to be Batman in the real world? Batman doesn't have superpowers. He's not from another planet, anything like that. He's his appeal has always been that he's sort of the most achievable of superheroes for the average person, provided that you happen to be a billionaire and so on, right? So I got up and I started Googling around and discovered, wow, there's actually quite a few of these people, obviously not billionaires and not to the same extent, but there's a lot of people. It's a veritable subculture that's global. It's not just, most of them are in fact in the United States, but it is in fact a global phenomenon. And it's people from all walks of life, every race, color, creed, sexual orientation, political slant, economic situation, and so on and so on. And, as I got further into this, it was just a rabbit hole that I fell down and got to know a lot of these people, talked to them. I interviewed or patrolled with close to about 100 of them in a number of countries. So it was a fascinating experience. And I found that they had, besides the fact that they're so diverse and come from all walks of life, there is a general sort of common denominator that they speak to, and that is that they're trying to use the power of the superhero or the symbolic power of the superhero to combat sort of this declining trust and responsibility in that public institutions, whether it's law enforcement or government, homeless agencies, and so on. A lot of these agencies and departments, institutions are failing people, and this is what these people stand for, is trying to kind of do it yourself, I guess, and bring people out of their apathy to care about those problems.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So I came across you by sort of going through various forums, you go through Reddit and all these places, and suddenly it's like, wow, this is interesting. And I like you, am a massive nerd, and I read a ton of different science fiction. And also, I'm really, really big into graphic novels, but also like, the edgy, weird sort of people that wouldn't necessarily be superheroes, but like in future context, people like Spider Jerusalem in Transmetropolitan and all these people. And it's kind of interesting to me that these imaginary worlds need these superheroes in a figurative sense, but then these people are coming back in. So we've got heroes all over the world. I mean, you talk about the Extreme Justice League down in San Diego, and they've got names like Grim, Edge Runner, Light Fist, Fallen Boy, Mr. Extreme, Midnight Highwayman, Brick, which is kind of a great name. Just like, do you?
It's very simple.
Yeah, and Violet Valkyrie. These people sit down and they must have been ruminating and thinking about this for years. So, I mean, what's in the mind of these people as they're planning to become superheroes, and what's in the mind of them when they sort of hit the streets, as it were?
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. What they do is, they when they sit down, and we should differentiate what these people do, real life superheroes versus cosplayers, because cosplayers are people who will dress up like Spider-Man or Batman or Deadpool or whoever, whereas these people create their own personas, their own characters. And I think a large part of that is that they're kind of creating this idealized version of themselves. Like, this is the virtuous person that they want to be, and the superheroic form of themselves. And so they do good deeds in this persona and in this costume. And what I found was really interesting in talking to some of them who had done it for a while, and especially those who had kind of quote unquote retired, is many of them talked about how it was kind of a journey, they doing these deeds, and we'll talk about that in a second, but doing these deeds got them to that higher level that they envisioned, to the point where they didn't need the costume or the persona anymore. And they've just become, at least according to them, they'd become that better person that they hope to become. In terms of what they do, so there is a variety of things that they do. I think you can generally break it down into two general areas. One is the so-called crime fighting, which is they'll go out into the streets, usually at night in the downtown cores, and they'll kind of almost act as peacekeepers. So they'll patrol around, often in where the bars might be. In San Diego, that's the gas lamp district, for example. And if there's fights breaking out, they'll intervene. They'll break up those fights. They'll try to de-escalate situations. They do the Extreme Justice League in San Diego, who I hung out with for a couple of nights. They found a guy who was really drunk, a tourist, and they literally carried him back to his hotel. So they do that sort of safety patrol, peacekeeping side of things. And then the other side of it, the other main activity is what they call homeless missions, which is they'll gather up a bunch of supplies, sleeping bags, toiletries, bottles of water, and so on, and go to the areas of town where there might be large numbers of homeless people, and they'll give out those things, and they'll actually talk to the homeless people. Some of it was pretty heartening. They'll give them hugs, they'll talk to them. Part of what they're trying to do is to make these people feel like they're human, because those of us who do not do this are often guilty of really ignoring these people and putting blinders on, sometimes even crossing the street to avoid them. So, part of their mission is to try to make these people feel human and remind them that, yes, somebody does care about them. So those are the two main activities. A lot of them do kind of a blend of the two. There's other things they do. They'll do like used needle pickups. So they'll walk around and do that. They'll clean up their neighborhoods and so on. So really just kind of good deeds. And that's kind of the North American ideal, and to some extent in Britain and the other sort of English-speaking countries. Once we get into places like Central and South America and Africa, it's a totally different story, but that's a longer answer.
Okay, and we'll get into that. So, I mean, how do these people sort of interact with like the police that are out there? Because surely the police must be like, whoa, what are you doing? Or is there some sort of like hidden sort of acceptance for these people to be out there sort of doing good deeds? Or is there, on the flip side, is it like, no, we must stop these vigilantes in a way?
Yeah, it really depends on where we're talking about and which groups we're talking about. So the Extreme Justice League in San Diego, they started about 10 years ago, and they've made a very concerted effort to kind of establish themselves as an institution. They're a registered charity group. Um, their leader, Mr. Extreme, he was a former Guardian Angels leader. So he incorporated a lot of their policies and procedures and techniques and so on. And they've made a concerted effort to try to be friendly with the police and to help them. Some of their members have provided evidence in court cases and that sort of thing. So I talked to there was one police officer who we ran across him while they were patrolling, and I talked to him, and he was like, yeah, these guys are fantastic. They're out here every weekend. We're really underfunded down here in San Diego, the police. So it's great to have more eyes and ears out there. The flip side is when you could go up to Seattle back a few years ago, the big guy out there was Phoenix Jones, and he was kind of like this guy who was very close to what you would imagine Batman would be like in the real world. He had this rubber bulletproof armor. He's a mixed martial artist by trade. And he had his team, the Rain City Superhero Movement, and they were quite aggressive. He actually ended up in court. The police brought him in because they said that he ran into this group of people and just started pepper spraying everybody. I believe he got off. I can't remember the details of the court case, but the Seattle police and the prosecutors, they're not very big fans of this type of real life superhero thing. So it's a really, it depends on, what sort of attitude they take and what sort of relationships they try to cultivate with the local law enforcement. So it does vary.
Yeah, it's really interesting as well with the whole discussion around defunding the police, or reapportioning budget to the right parts of society and away from police intervention to like more psychological, consultative, more social care intervention in a way. And to talk about Seattle a little bit, it's interesting during the Black Lives Matter riots, inverted commas, or activism. Capitol Hill, where there was a police station, the police just left. And they then, the locals turned it into, or some of the locals, I should say, and people that came into that part of town from out of area, they created the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. And then I remember watching a reporter, and he's been followed by this strange sort of, like a slightly gothic looking guy, in terms of his dress, not dressed up as a superhero, but kind of policing him. To the point that the guy's actually scared, and it's being kind of scary. So we're kind of in this world. I remember in the 1980s, and you talk about Mr. Extreme, the Guardian Angels in New York City sort of popped up there. And that was very quickly adopted into the news as something that was needed in New York City, that was valuable in New York City. And you'd see these people there. You don't really see them anymore because New York's a lot safer than it used to be in the 80s, right? But it's interesting you talk about charity. They become charity groups, that they help, but what really sort of makes these people keep doing it? I mean, is there truly a need for these people, and do we have enough of them to make a difference in the average city?
Yeah, good questions. There's a lot of different ways to answer that. I think so. If we want to start with vigilantism, so I think we're talking primarily here about the United States, and I detail this in the book quite a bit. The United States has a vigilante tradition that most other Western countries don't, certainly not in Europe and not in Canada. As the US was kind of developing as a country and expanding westward, vigilantism was a necessary, I'm not going to call it a necessary evil, it was just a necessary fact. Vigilantism occurs in the absence of law or in the failure of law. So it's a necessary occurrence. So you're seeing a lot of that these days in so many different forms. So whether it's, actual vigilante justice on the streets or in things online, like, for example, the Me Too movement, for example, there's shades of vigilantism to that. This is an answer to decades of problems in regards to sexual harassment and abuse of power and so on. And the institutions that should be doing something about that were not. So of course you've got this sort of almost vigilante answer to that. So that's part of it, I think. Why do these individuals do this? I think That's part of it. The other part of it is I had a couple people explain it to me as, it's like a Superman Batman thing going on. Superman does what Superman does because he was raised by really good people, and he was just taught responsibility and giving back to society. He's been gifted, so he owes it to society to give back, and so on and so on. And then on the other side, you have Batman, who does what he does because he's messed up. His parents were killed in front of him, and he's either trying to get some personal therapy out of this, or it's a revenge thing. And so certainly a lot of real life superheroes do it out of that as well. Not necessarily that their parents were killed in front of them, but they may have been bullied when they were younger, or they've got other issues that they're trying to work out, and so on and so on. And then a third motivating factor that was suggested to me was the booster gold factor. That's something you probably only know about if you're a super nerd. Booster Gold is another DC Comics superhero who he's a guy who comes back from the future with all these gadgets with the sole purpose of becoming rich and famous through being a superhero. So that certainly some people are doing it to gain attention as well, and try to go viral or whatever. I found that it's a lot of them, it's kind of a mix of all three,
Right.
certain in differing percentages, I guess you could say.
When you were writing the book, did you sort of also look at the sort of the outlaw side of, I wouldn't necessarily call these superheroes, but there's definitely a persona, there's definitely an outfit, there's definitely an organization. People like the mafia, people like Hell's Angels, even in modern times, people like self-organizing militia down in the United States. Did you look at that side of things as a counterpoint to these sort of the do-gooders as well? Because a lot of these people, they say that they do good in communities, they keep them safe, they share money, they sort of police as well, right?
Yeah. It's funny you should ask that, because there was a section in a book so I'm in Toronto, and I remember back in I believe it was the early 90s, we had the Guardian Angels try to come here and set up shop, and our leadership was always resistant to them. They actually never really took root. There were several attempts here, and one of our mayors, he said something along the lines of, they're a vigilante group, and vigilante groups always go bad. I think he said something like the mafia started out good too, and then of course look what happened to them. There's a bigger chunk in the book where I look at what's happening in Africa. So I mentioned that the United States has this vigilante tradition that most Western countries don't have. And that's actually not true in a lot of African countries, where you do actually have a vigilante tradition. So I talk about the Bakassi boys in Nigeria. This is just one example of the many vigilante groups in many different African countries. This is exactly a group that started, it's almost like it almost proves the Toronto mayor's point. This is a group that started off as there was a lot of crime in this area of Nigeria, in this village, that they were they started as shoe sellers and shoe cobblers, and so they were being harassed by criminals, and there was a lot of crime in their town, to the point where it was getting hard to do business. They had an international market there that used to attract people from neighboring countries, and those people were starting to stay away because of the high level of crime. So this group of shoe sellers and cobblers, grouped together and called themselves the Bakassi Boys, or that's what they were called, and they were merciless on criminals. They basically, went after these criminals and killed them and chopped them up with machetes. And,
oh wow!
The interesting thing, though, is the reason I included them in the book, not just because they were vigilantes, but also because there was a lot of supernatural elements attached to them. They believed, or it was believed, that their machetes, if they held their machetes to a person's chest and the machete turned red, then they knew they were lying, or something to that.
Yeah.
So they had these mystical powers, and they were immune to corruption, and that was seen as their biggest superpower. Anyway, long story short, they eventually did go bad. They became the local governments enlisted them and kind of corrupted them into becoming their personal militias. So, this is a case where that does happen a lot with vigilante groups. And so that's always the threat. And especially when you're talking about the United States and you're talking about militia groups versus real life superhero groups, there is, it's not that far of a distance from one to the other.
Right. And oftentimes these people go to the edge of their capabilities, and it might be a point where they want to talk and share with someone and offload some of that burden, or someone empowers them. That burden, that ego turns into something bigger. I mean, who do these superheroes turn to for help themselves? I mean, they must have to go, they must lean into, use of some technology, but they must also lean into, oh no, we call the police at X. We call these people at, this other point in time.
Right. Well, I think for much of it, I think that's why you see a lot of groups. It is almost kind of group therapy for a lot of them. So for those who are, have issues that they're trying to deal with, getting together with like-minded people it's group therapy, I guess, in a lot of ways. When it comes to requiring help, they've all got the walkie-talkies, and most of the teams, the Extreme Justice League is the best one I can think of, because they're so based on Guardian Angels protocols. They actually have, when they go out on patrol, they have roles. There's like the patrol leader. There's the I can't remember what their actual roles are, but there's like sort of like the muscle if something happens, and then they'll have the communications officer. So that person is in charge of whenever there's an incident, they immediately contact police or ambulance or whatever. So the ones that are relatively well organized, have got that side of it of things covered. So it's a combination. They're covered in terms of the necessary backup that they have, but also in terms of their personal needs. I think that's what they're there for. That's it's group therapy.
Do you ever have you found any superheroes out there that don't wear masks or capes or outfits, that just go literally they operate, they call themselves superheroes, but they operate in the clear light of the day in a way?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of them don't actually. And it's kind of interesting because I think it mirrors what's happening in fiction too. There was an article, I think, not too long ago about how Marvel Comics was kind of getting rid of secret identities for its superheroes. And certainly when you watch the movies, it seems like almost none of them have secret identities anymore. That's happened in the real life superhero community. I think there's been a shift away from the sort of the Phoenix Jones hardcore crime fighter types to more of the charity minded types. And those are the types that really tend to care less about, if they're identified or so on. The crime fighters would say, well, I'm wearing a mask. I don't want my identity out there because I don't want, blowback from, if I stop this guy and put him in jail or whatever, I don't want him coming back on me, which is like totally out of the comic books. But the ones who are more engaging in helping homeless people and doing charitable acts and that kind of stuff, they're not as hung up about it because they'll say, well, if my boss at work finds out I'm helping homeless people, oh no, what are they going to do? Like, how horrible is that? That's not something I want to keep hidden or need to keep hidden.
Right, yeah, and the stigma's sort of gone there. It's interesting over the last 2 or 3 years, and obviously with Black Panther coming out, and obviously we tragically lost Chadwick Boseman this year, right? But he kind of blurred the lines between that hero and what the Black community was looking for in the superhero the world, and then sort of brought that into it was like he'd share the income that you'd make with a film with a female cast member, or he would like empower like these kids to have more self-esteem, or to push further, or stay in school and all these things, and that sort of crosses things. Do you think we're going to see more superheroes sort of come out of this culture, from seeing the films? Because the Avengers franchise is probably one of the biggest franchises in the world now, and there's dozens of superheroes in there. The old two, like Spider-Man's going through multiple sort of generations of films. There's new Batman films coming out, which I still can't believe. Right, it still comes through, especially where it came from in like the late 60s, early 70s, and how sort of kitsch that was in a way. And even there's like science fiction, science fantasy, and whatever. But coming back into that word, I mean, for one, like I would say, okay, I kind of love Spider Jerusalem as that sort of rebel journalist on the streets in Transmetropolitan, and Batman, that sort of the resourcefulness, but like, you know, the toughness and righteousness of Rick Deckard from Blade Runner, and then sort of the divination of Neo from the Matrix. You know, I see all of these people as being sort of things that have shaped who I am as well. You know, not only being a massive nerd, but someone that sort of is a collective, you know, mirror for culture, counterculture, science fiction, and otherwise. I mean, you know, what about you? I mean, what are the sort of the fictional superheroes that you really think reflect how you've sort of changed to operate in the world?
Sure. It really sucks that Chadwick Boseman died. I've been saying to friends over the last little while that we actually need more Black Panther and less Batman.
Right.
You know, both. So Black Panther, it's hard to overstate how important that movie was, both in terms of what you actually saw on, you know, the story in film, and what it meant, you know, sort of in actual society. We're both white guys, so, you know, we enjoyed it on one level, but, you know, just if you're reading how Black audiences reacted to this film, it was huge. It was absolutely huge, and you can imagine how empowering it would be, especially because the history of superheroes is so white. To have so few people who can inspire, you know, the whole idea of superheroes, the whole reason we're talking about this, the whole reason for my book, is that superheroes, whether it's real or fictional, are supposed to inspire people to be better and to do good things. So to have more representation, I think is just a fantastic thing. But in the film, you know, the Black Panther was also, you know, one of the messages in that movie was, I think he says something like, the wise man builds bridges and the fool builds walls, or something to that effect. Superheroes were originally created in the 1930s and 1940s as progressive characters. They were there to shake up the status quo and to fight for the little guy. Superman was the hero of the repressed when he first began. But somewhere along the way, they became almost agents of the state. There's been a lot of commentary about how superheroes are conservative in their very nature, and possibly even fascist, because they are, if you look at somebody, this is why I say we need less Batman. Batman, for most of his history, has been friends with the police. He's been pals with Commissioner Gordon. So, and then meanwhile, you have the Avengers, who are basically working a lot of the time with or for SHIELD, which is a government agency. So, given the current climate, I think superheroes are going to have to change back into what they first started as, which are these progressive characters and forces that are not so much enforcers of the status quo as they are agents of changing the status quo and, you know, sort of progressing society into being better and so on. That's why I think it's funny, because the new Batman film, I watched the trailer for that a little while ago. Right. And I was a little bit horrified because you got to boil Batman down into his essence and realize that I don't think that character really fits in what's going on with the world right now. He's a white billionaire dressed in black armor with military gadgets, totally unaccountable and anonymous, that is often in league with the police. And in the trailer, he's beating on these, you know, they're probably criminals, but, you know, whatever. That message that sends a really bad message, given everything that's happening with Black Lives Matter and so on. I think, like I said, I think Batman is probably a character. He's the most successful superhero of all time in terms of, like, you know, actual value. Can't remember what the value is. It's something like $25 billion is the value of the Batman franchise. But I think Warner Brothers would do well to kind of put him on the shelf for a while. And I believe that movie's been delayed till 2022. So yeah. I kind of wonder if they've latched onto that thinking.
Yeah, you know, I think film executives need to be sort of put up against the wall a little bit and sort of questioned somewhat about their motivations, because it's like, okay, you know, formula superhero franchise, more films. Oh, okay, diversity. Right. Okay. So Batgirl, or Supergirl. It's like, okay, that's not really playing out. And there was a big sort of celebration the last couple of weeks because the first Muslim superhero has
Right,
been
Miss
cast.
Marvel.
I think it's a girl out of Toronto,
Yep.
certainly out of Canada. What's the name of the superhero?
That's Miss Marvel.
Yeah.
Canada's doing really well. We've got we've got Miss Marvel is coming, and then Shang-Chi is also a Marvel. Yeah, he's not really a superhero; it's more of a martial artist, but
Right.
Canadian guy playing him too. So that movie is on its way.
Yeah.
So yeah, better late than never, I guess.
Yeah. So and I think in sort of the underground comic book scene, we see people creating these superheroes that are super.
Yeah.
I remember reading a book a few years ago, The Pro, and I don't know if you've ever seen this comic book. It's a prostitute, a female prostitute. Okay, go figure. A female prostitute that was given superpowers. and it's like, okay, that's really weird. And I sort of go digging in comic book fairs or whatever for lots of things in the edge. But independent comic book writers are really writing really edgy, interesting sort of fiction to try and balance things out a little bit and to broaden the conversation. And we certainly hope that sort of comes into sort of the universe that's been created by money. I mean, Disney's just said its focus of its business is streaming. So you can imagine we're gonna get like tons of that genre like hitting our kids' eyes before long.
Well, there's a full chapter in my book that takes a look at Africa. So again, not just the Bakassi boys, but I think this is probably would come to a surprise to a lot of people in North America that, I think the images that we have of Africa, of many African countries, are always negative,
Right.
Poverty and crime and so on. But there's a lot of positive things going on there. So prior to the pandemic, for example, comic book conventions were exploding across Africa. In many countries, they were just mushrooming in terms of number and attendance at all of them. The one in Johannesburg, I think, was on its second year, and it was like it doubled from its first year to the point where they were going to do another one, a separate one in Cape Town.
Right.
So you've got it's exploding there. That's a really good sign because when you've got something like that happening, it's showing that there is actually people have the time, the desire, and the means to enjoy what's ultimately a sort of frivolous entertainment, right? But also, you've also got a burgeoning comic book scene happening again in Nigeria. Going back to Nigeria, I talked to the head of a comic book company publisher there called Comic Republic, and their whole plan or their whole thinking was a lot of kids have grown up reading American superhero comics, but they don't really have anything local. So that's what they're doing is they're creating local superheroes, Nigerian superheroes with stories set in Nigeria and other African countries. So, that's cool. That's giving people there something to look up to and aspire to. So there is a lot of really fascinating and good stuff happening in many of the countries in Africa as well.
So from this fictional world and back into the real world, I advise municipalities across Canada and cities across the United States and further beyond. Are we going to actually find? I've been playing. This is how I came across you. I was researching into a particular West Coast city, and I was like, it's really interesting. I was chatting to a couple of my futurist friends about it. It's like this idea of why don't we find or create our own superheroes to become like the figureheads for some kind of strength in the community? I mean, do you think this is going to become legitimized in a way?
I think so, and I think that's a really good segue into Mexico, which I promised I'd mention earlier.
Yeah.
So the situation in Mexico is a little bit different than what we've seen in Canada and the United States, and I think it's my favorite part of the book because I find this so fascinating. In Mexico, pro wrestlers are superheroes,
right?
Luchadors, as they're known. Many of them wear masks, and in Canada and the United States, pro wrestling is kind of like this lowbrow. It's always been seen as this lowbrow entertainment. I personally am a fan, so I do not treat it with any sort of contempt. But in Mexico, it's arisen very differently. It's become a cultural. It's like I believe it's got cultural like UNESCO status to some degree in Mexico, because it has become sort of like their superhero culture. In the 50s and onwards, children were banned from going to matches, so they really started to migrate a lot of the luchadors into films. So their most famous wrestler is El Santo, and he was a huge film star. I can't remember. There were dozens and dozens of El Santo movies where he would basically battle zombies and Nazis and space aliens and so on. So he was literally a superhero. And Mexico had the superhero movie craze decades before the rest of the world did. So luchadors in Mexico are very much superheroes. And that has migrated, of course, into the real world too. There's been a number of characters there who have taken up the power of the superhero luchador and used it to promote social causes. So probably the best known was a guy named Super Barrio. So back in 1985, when there was the huge earthquake that hit Mexico City and thousands upon thousands of people were left homeless, he was the symbol of, the government was being very slow in getting homes for these people. So he arose, this masked character, to fight for tenant rights. And then he would do things like when landlords would come to evict people, he would show up and basically prevent them from doing so. And, he became a very successful political figure. And a lot of people followed his leads. There was Fray Tormenta. Do you remember a movie called Nacho Libre starring Jack Black?
Yeah.
I love that movie. It was essentially the story of a friar in a monastery who he can't feed the orphans living there. So he doesn't have money to feed them. So he becomes a wrestler to earn money named... in the movie is Nacho Libre, but in real, this is based on a real story. Right. It's based on Fray Tormenta, who did the same thing. So you had all kinds. So you've had all types there. You've had Super Animal, who was he led a crusade to get bullfights banned in Mexico City. I think he was somewhat successful. I'm not positive. So you've had a lot of the real life superheroes in Mexico have used that image of the superhero luchador to become figureheads for these social causes. And that's pretty different from what they've done in many other countries. But I think that's it's been a really powerful and really successful, sort of tactic that they've used in Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of look out into the real world a little further outside of Mexico as well. Like Greta Thunberg, she's kind of a superhero, young girl takes on the world, that sort of thing. I was thinking about this, like you, I'm up in the middle of the night, I'm thinking about things. Maybe the Dalai Lama is a superhero. His compassion, like literally, like the guy, if you've ever seen him, like the everything radiates from him and everything feels a lot better. The way that he laughs, the way that he talks about compassion. Well, I sort of talk about that. I think it's interesting, we look at, the great Stan Lee, and this is what he said about superheroes, right? That person who helps others simply because it should or must be done. And because it's a right thing to do is indeed, without doubt, a real superhero. So you could be a superhero and probably are. And I can be a superhero and certainly hope to be one day. I'm the futurist, whatever. Go. Right? But we go out there, we push, and I think that everyone needs to bear that in mind. That everyone's got those superpowers, and the superpowers around even being connective in society today is rare and beautiful and needs to be brought together. But Peter, I'm incredibly excited to have done this conversation with you, and I'm pretty sure that we're going to have more conversations going forward. I mean, I also live in Toronto, so we'll get together once the evil arch nemesis of COVID-19 has been defeated by, I don't know who the superhero is, super pharma companies, I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, I look forward to getting together with you. So everyone go out there and check out Peter's book, The Rise and Real Life Superheroes and the Fall of Everything Else. It's definitely worth a read. I really enjoyed reading it, reading about the people in there, and really from Africa to Mexico to Canada down into the United States. There's amazing people doing amazing things, and it comes from the heart and it comes from goodness. And we certainly need more of that in society today. So Peter Nowak, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time today, and we'll chat again soon.
My pleasure, Nick. Thanks a lot for having me.